So whose story are you living out? That's actually what we're going to be talking about on episode number 24 of The Relaxed Male. Hello and welcome to Relaxed Male, a podcast that helps men change their relationship with themselves. I am your host, Brian, and I am a men's life and mindset coach who is here to help you understand that you don't have to suffer at your own expense. You can live your dream, and I encourage you to set, then pursue your goals. So join me as I change the mindset and attitudes of men so that they can be the leaders of their families and their destinies. Hey man, hello and welcome to Relaxed Male. So, talking stories today. Now, I think I've mentioned stories a few times before, but I wanted to go into a little more depth and actually talk about what story you're actually living. And yes, we do all live a story. It may not be the epic hero's journey that you're thinking of and that you have in mind. You may not be Luke Skywalker standing on the edge of their evaporation farm and looking at two suns as a set, but you could be the hero of your own particular story. Or maybe you are the hapless and hapless victim in your story. And it all really depends on how you are looking at it. So many of us tell ourselves stories and don't even realize that we're actually telling ourselves a story. And so first I want to get at what does it mean by a story? Whenever I'm talking about telling yourself a story. Well, this is, say you're walking down the street and, I don't know, you see you see a man who is just all sorts of grumpy. All right. And he's yelling at somebody else. Well, you've got two different stories. The guy's either A, having a really bad day. Maybe his wife just left him and she took all the money out of the bank and is just having the problem. Imagine the worst day possible. He accidentally, ran over his dog as he was backing out of the house after his wife kicked him out. There's a whole series of scenarios that we are putting through our head whenever we see somebody. Some people call this, judging, and to a point. Yeah, you're right. It is we're judging somebody because we are seeing what's going on in our brain. Since we don't know what's actually going on, our brain is going to fill in the empty spots, the detailed omitted points that we have no clue about. And so we come up with these different stories. But we also tell ourselves stories. We can sometimes be lying to ourselves. And so when we are late for work, we may be saying, well, I was caught up in traffic, when in all reality you left 15 minutes late. Whether you overslept or something at the house kept you from being able to leave on time. Either way, there's a story that you're telling yourself. I couldn't help it. I had no choice in the matters. I had to buy this brand spanking new car. My other one was 8 years old, and it was, you're going to have a story, right? You're going to have this story. You're going to be telling yourself a story as to talk yourself into, say, buying a car, or why somebody else that you see out on the street is just being a complete and total douchebag. You're looking at this and you're making a story. These stories are the narrative as to which we are living. Now, I'm actually going to focus in more on what you're telling yourself, because there are other people, and we'll talk about this here in a sec, but there are people who have their own stories about you. And we work so hard on trying to change those stories while ignoring the important story, which is our own. So when it comes to the stories, that we're telling ourselves. Those stories can be anything from a victim-oriented story, like I said, to where we are being just as benevolent as we possibly can. Those stories just really depend on the frame that you're looking at. So if you're having a bad day, say you're late for work, you just dropped the ball on getting a hold of a key customer for the company you work for even for your own business. You may be wanting to tell yourself the story of, well, I couldn't help it. I had these unforeseen instances, and those stories are just a means of where we are lying to ourselves. You can actually you'll tell yourself a lie. Now, you can also try to change, if you try to change your story. If you tell yourself a lie, it's not going to work either. And again, I'll talk about that here in a moment. So, but the stories that we have affect how we go about our day. If we tell ourselves that I'm having a off day, I'm just having a really crappy day, and I couldn't help things like that. And if you're telling yourself, hey, I'm having a bad day, well, guess what? You're going to have a bad day. If you're telling yourself, hey, if you're telling yourself that, hey, I'm just not that smart at math. Well, guess what? You're really not going to be all that good at math. That story is going to affect how you act in the world. So if you run around saying I'm a fat dude looking for a hamburger, well, guess what? You're going to like hamburgers a whole lot, and you're going to be extra pudgy around the middle because of that story. Your mind takes that story and applies it to make sure that it gets fulfilled. It wants things to be true. So if you tell yourself over and over again that you're a fat man, well, guess what? Eventually you're going to wind up being a fat man. I have that problem all the time. I'm starting to change my story where I say I'm rocking the dad bod. I'm getting around to where I don't want to have this dad bod anymore. Sorry, I need to ditch, about an extra, last time I looked, about extra 60 pounds off my gut and get myself toned up because, well, one, I want to live well into my 80s or 90s, even see if I can clear 100. And to do that, I can't do that being a pudgy dude. I need to be fit. I need to be more toned. I need to be in shape. I need to have a different mindset. And so those mindsets influence what your story is. So if you can actually, take those stories and bend them. And if you can pay attention to where the story's coming from, is it coming from one playing a victim or one where you are just looking out for yourself? Well, you can take those and you can shift those around and you can make that to where you're having a good day. It's just, you had a hiccup along the way, or to where you're looking out for yourself. You can change that. You can stop being Han Solo at the beginning and become, Han Solo at the end of Return of the Jedi, where he's a very honorable guy. Yeah, he may be a scruffy looking nerf herder at the beginning, but at the end he becomes a General Solo. So you can change your story. Your story can develop. Yeah, you may have things that happened in the past. You may have been a scoundrel at one time, but you can turn around and become a good guy. So, but you also have stories about you that other people have. And like I said at the beginning, we work so hard to want to change those people's story. They may think that we just look out for ourselves all the time. And we may, you may, and you may not. But the key to that point is that it doesn't matter what their story is. Their story can be, hey, I take care of myself first because my priority levels are God, me, my family, and to be able to take care of the family and all the people who are underneath me, I have to take care of myself first. That whole, the whole put on your mask before you put on your child's mask. You're not going to do them any good if you are incapacitated. If you're not taking care of yourself, you can't help the other people. I can't provide food and shelter for my wife if I'm not taking care of myself. So the key to a lot of that, and the key to other people's stories, is they're going to just apply the stories to of the things that they see. And yeah, their stories can change, but you're not going to be able to make them change. And you're not, and trying to go up to somebody and try to tell them off that they're wrong, they've got the wrong idea, and they don't know anything about you, is not going to do any good, because trying to force a person to change their mind just doesn't work. Not at all. There's no way to force a person to change their mind. The only way, if you want to change a person's mind and say they think that you're just selfish and all about yourself, well, forcing them to change their minds, like I said, it's not going to work. But if you, and not as a means of parading around in front of them going, I am a righteous person, that don't be a Pharisee so much, but you want to be, if you live true to what your story is, your story actually emanates out from you and influences the other people's stories. So when I say don't worry about their story, that means don't worry about their story. Their story is going to either stay the same or change depending on what they see of you. So just if you keep true to what your story is, one, it's not going to matter what other people think anyhow, because their story doesn't actually influence you. It's like you may come up with the reaction of, no, they can, if they don't like me, they're going to do what they can to keep me from succeeding. They can do what they want, but the boss is going to have his own story of you. Everybody has a story, has their own judgments about each other. Whether you want to be judgmental or not, doesn't matter. It's your stories, your view is going to be different than another person's story and view. Look at the division of America right now, because you've got one side who just thinks Trump is just the most horrible, terrible, won't have anything to do with him. There's people who go as far as calling it the Trump derangement syndrome, where the guy could come along and, give everybody some, money, and they would still curse him for doing a good job. And then there's the other side who just thinks he does nothing but good and is great and wonderful and awesome. And he could do no harm. He could do the most evil act known to man. And there's people there who would still think he's a pretty good dude. Everybody has a different story, a different narrative about other people and about themselves. And so it doesn't matter, because like Trump's doing, it doesn't matter what one side or the other side is thinking. He's got his course that he's plotted out, and he's going through and doing it. And so it's the same thing for you. It doesn't matter what other people are thinking, because the most important thing is that the story that you tell yourself. Are you telling yourself a truthful story, or are you even telling your actual story? Because sometimes we're so busy trying to make sure that we live up to other people's stories that we forget our story. We leave our story behind and we jump into their narrative. And so we start living by other people's thoughts and opinions. And that never works for any reason. Though sometimes people want to say that they don't have a choice. I knew a couple of kids whenever I was in college. They were majoring in classes that they claimed that they didn't like. Now, whether they liked it or not, I don't know, but that's what they claimed. They claimed they didn't want to be a lawyer, didn't want to be be something, be whatever their major was. And when you ask them, it's like, well, that's what my parents want me to be. It's like, well, then don't do it. It's like, well, I have to. If I don't, they won't pay it. I can't afford to go to school if they don't pay it. That's the story that they're telling themselves to justify living out their parents' dream, their parents' story of them. And we do. All as parents have a different story for our kids than what our kids have. So for a long time, we always talked about, Jaden going into architecture or something like that. Well, come to find out, having to sit in a college, class for hours at a time is not what my son, was made to do. He is a outdoor dude. He has to be outdoors. He has to be physical. He has to be doing stuff. And so commercial fishing fits a lot more into his wheelhouse, his story, his narrative of who he wants to be and what he is able to do than any story that I could come up for him. And so, yeah, it's parents. We may not like the story, the angle that our kid goes to. I'm glad that my son has become a commercial fisherman. I see him having a great time, even though he's out breaking his back. He is, it's hard work, but it's work he likes to do. And so that's what's really cool about it, is just being able to let him live that particular story out. But when it comes back to like the kids, the college kids who couldn't, like I said, they lied on themselves to justify living out their parents' story. Because if they really stood back and actually looked at it, you'd see that, yeah, they can afford to go to college. They could even afford to do a full set, but there's other little details in there that they really don't want to have to do. Yeah, it means they would have to go out. They'd have to, instead of going and when I was in college, we hung out at the mall. All right. And you would go to the mall and you'd see all your friends there, and everybody'd stand around, talk, and, maybe buy something over at Spencer's, and then go to the food court and grab food and talk to your friends who happen to be working behind the counter, and maybe they'd give you a free Coke or two. And so you would have to actually, a lot of those kids would have to actually give up the life of ease of being able to just sit around. They would actually have to work, at UPS or someplace that pays decent, but means that they have to actually put some effort into their work, instead of hanging out over at the clothing store where they would be working to take care, and just have to worry about getting all the clothes folded when a new shipment come in. There are always ways of changing your story. So, but when it comes to your story, you can look at it and look at what mindset it is. You're telling yourself when it comes to your story. So take this example. When I was a kid, my dad had a ranch. Now, in the wintertime, he would actually he would have me get up, and we'd go out and we'd have to bust up the ice in the stock tanks and it'd be, it was wintertime. It's cold. And, not that there was days in the wintertime that it wasn't cold and that the ice the stock tanks weren't frozen, but those times that really stick in your head are those times where it was, there's a inch or 2 inches of ice or even more that had needed to be busted up so that the cattle could come and have a drink. And you couldn't just break up the ice and just call it good. No, you had to go and fish those chunks out of the stock tanks so that it would take longer for that ice to refreeze. So you had Texas north wind blowing, cold, wet hands, and you may have coveralls on, but as you're digging the ice chunks out, you're bringing water with it. So you're getting your coveralls wet. And so it gets cold. You look forward to when you finally are able to climb back into that pickup and thaw out a little bit. And then in the spring, I would be out. Dad would tell me, hey, there's the fence in such and such pastures, not charged all the way. I need you to go find out where the short's at. And so I would have to be in the pickup in the rain, driving along a fence line, periodically turning on the AM radio, opening the door, touching the hot wire and seeing if I get a click. Cause that's how we tested. You could either get a fence tester and climb out and then stick the probe in the ground and then touch the other end to the fence tester and see how strong it was. Cause there's usually like 5 lights, and the stronger the electrical pulse was, more lights that would light up and the brighter those lights would be. But if you wanted to be lazy, you could just drive up next to the fence and then open your door and touch the door to the electric fence with the radio on. And you'd hear somebody talking or even just static. And all of a sudden you hear a thunk, 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 thunk. So you knew, hey, we've got juice going through this wire. And so you would drive and you'd see a big old patch of weeds. And so you would go to the opposite side and open the door and hear a thunk, thunk. All right, well, we're good there. And so you'd go down a little further and keep testing every so often just to see if you could figure out where this short was. And a lot of times it was in a corner post and it was a bunch of tumbleweeds that piled up there, and it's raining, of course. So you're all muddy. Everything's muddy and it's all miserable. And so you've got all this, you finally find the weeds. And so then you get the fun of trying to get those weeds dug out because one's grounding someplace. So you grab a hold of the wrong weed at the wrong time, you're going to get lit up. Believe me, I got lit up a lot. I still don't like electricity. So you found the best thing to do is actually just grab a fiberglass handled hammer and just drag the tumbleweeds out of the way until you get that area cleared, and then take those weeds, and I would throw them over the fence so the wind would just carry them on down the road. So I would do that in the spring, during the rain, and it would still get cold. It wasn't 80 degree and warm rain. It was usually 45 degrees and a very cold rain. And then in the summers, there was a combination of building miles of fence and 100-degree weather, or Dad would have me hop on the old tractor that seemed like it did not like me and always wanted to vapor lock the worst darn time and be out grading roads. And it always seems like I was grading with the wind. So I was, by the end of the day, covered in dirt, all sorts of gritty. And it was just a horrible time. And with that type of story, yeah, it's going to sound miserable. It's going to sound like I was just, all horribly abused. And you've heard your kids do the same thing, go up to people saying, oh, I can't get this. And it's like, well, yeah, he can't. And you tell the other half of the story, and all of a sudden the story doesn't sound quite as traumatic as the kid wants to make it out. But I could also take those very same instances, and with a different mindset, instead of having the victim-based mindset of, I didn't even want to be out here today, and I was either froze to death or I was cooking to a crisp. It was horrible. Well, it may not have been fun at the moment, but during the summer, I came back rocking a kicktail tan. So I was always sun tanned and having a good old time. So, but I can also take that whole story and change the mindset on it. And now I could actually say that many times, though I wanted to stay under the covers and sleep in the winter, my dad would need my help. And so he would come and he would wake me up and we would go out and we'd bust up the ice chunks. While I was out going from one stock tank to another, Dad was usually in the driver's seat and we would be talking. And my dad has an incredible sense of humor. And so usually somewhere along the way, there was several episodes of a good laugh or a good chuckle and so you always had, you didn't stay grumpy the whole time. It wasn't miserable instances. And then I remember that, in the summer, there was times where it might be 100 degrees, but my dad was right there beside me and I would just see the sweat just pouring off. It would just drip, drip, drip off the end of his nose. And he was a sweaty mess, but he was right in there. He was stretching out that wire and adding the insulators and putting on the clips and everything else that needed to be done when it was building fence. And I remember seeing all that sweat drip off of him and I starting to equate hard work and with sweat. And that actually applied, I would apply that to my work ethic down the road when I got older. And then, there was the season of ranching where you had to work the cattle. And so all the new cattle would be brought in and bought any, young bulls. We'd castrate them. And so this was all doing the stuff that we needed to do to cattle was called working the cattle. And that was not just a 2-person deal. It was a whole family affair. And so my cousins would come down and they would be with me and you'd have, our main, what I call cowboy. His name's Short. And he was, just one of the most wisdom filled guys I ever saw. He was your typical quintessential cowboy. He was always had, a saying for something. I still remember, he would always tell me the be ye early or be ye late, just be sure to shut the damn gate. So cause you always had to shut the gate once you got through it. Or you would hear be ye early or be ye late, but just be sure to shut the damn gate. He would always be saying that. He also, taught me not to hold on to the wrong end of the cattle prod. He could be a little wily, but at the same time, Short was a great guy and, always was, I remember always having him help us with working the cattle, but it was so much fun to work cattle. I always looked forward to when it was time to work cattle because I had my cousins with me. A lot of times we would be the way our deal was set up is actually set up in the same fashion as what, come to find out, Temple Grandin of, University of Colorado. She had started up this system. And so we had this great big, huge, what we called the circle. And it was this big round pin that had two sliding walls that we could go around in the circle to squeeze the cattle together so that they would want to go into the chute. And the chute, and the main chute we called the snake because it also curved off into another direction. And so me and my cousin Matt and sometimes Brandon and some of the other cousins would be down there and we would have the cattle prods and we'd be getting them to lead them into the snake. And it was always fun. You'd see us, someone would try to hop on the calves and try to ride it. And yeah, you wound up with a good bit of cowboy paint on your pants and sometimes on your back and maybe even in your hair. And, we always just had a good time doing it. And eventually you worked yourself up to where you were working the cattle through the chute and getting them put into the squeeze chute. And from there, if it was, you would, give them their shots and tag. And if needed to be branded, they would be branded and all the things that went on with with working the cattle. And it was a multi-day affair, and it was a good time. And, at the end of the day, they would divide up the bucket of calf fries. And if somebody nobody wanted them, then, more times than not, my dad would say, all right, sure. And he would grab them and go, and him and my stepmom would go through and spend the rest of the day cleaning them and then putting them and then freezing them in milk jugs. Not nearly a bad of a story. Yeah, it's a lot of the same instances with minus the working the cattle, but you can look at the same story and have two different means of viewing it. So you can either have the glass half full or you can have the glass half empty, but you can change how that story is reflected. So if you don't like the story that you're telling yourself, you can change how you look at that story. Well, I had a horrible life and I was terribly mistreated and ignored by my parents. Or you could say, well, my parents taught me how to be very independent. And because they worked all the time, I was a latchkey kid. So I had to come home and take care of myself and be self-reliant and get my homework done and all this and everything else. There's always a way to look at how a story goes. And yeah, you see other people who will tell a story and they tell a boohoo story and you're going, but dude, you're out of money. You're broke for the month because you just went off and bought yourself a brand new car that you can't afford. And that right there is a completely different story than what the other person told. Yeah, it may be in line. It may be in conjunction. It may be a means to set up a whole story. But at the same time, everybody has their own story and everybody can change how that story is framed. And so if you don't like the story that you have, change that story. You have that ability. You have the choice to choose a different story altogether. Say you're a dentist and after the first year of work of being an actual dentist, you actually went out and realized that, hey, you really are not a dentist type of person. You do not enjoy sticking your hands in other people's mouths in the slightest. And so how do you change that story? Well, it might be that, hey, I know that I started out as a dentist, but then I realized that I had a passion for painting. And I get so much enjoyment from painting the pictures of other people that's actually where I went from being a dentist to a person who being a well-known area in your area, a well-known painter. And so you can change how you view yourself. You can change how your story is. You can take the horrible, terrible parts and you can actually look at them. And if you use the right light, you can take that and learn from it and grow from it. And you apply it to your story so that you become a better person. So if you're telling yourself a story that that you're not liking, say you're not liking where you are, say you're having a rough day. Well, what story are you telling yourself to cause that rough day? So try this out for the next week. See what happens. Pay attention to what you're telling yourself. Pay attention to what you're telling others. And does that match up to what you really want in your life? If it doesn't, then rephrase it. Catch yourself in the middle of it. If you catch yourself in the middle of it, go, oh, nope, sorry, I'm working on that. I'm actually X, Y, and Z. So if you'd like to try do that, and if you have any success with it, please let me know. Give me a holler. And now, before I let you go, I do want to just kind of give you some updates. I am actually looking at starting a little segment before I dive into the main topic, and it's where I start answering a question from you folks. And I know right now this podcast is still fairly early in this season, early in its cycle. So I know I don't have a whole heaping lot of listeners, but I know I've got a few listeners who grab this podcast every week that it comes out. And so if you have a question, that you would like to have answered. You can actually shoot that question over to Brian, and that's Brian with a Y, at relaxedmale.com. And I will answer that. I will give you a few coaching tips on with that particular problem or barrier, whatever it is that you have in your way at the moment. If I don't have any questions, say I answer everybody's question and I still like to do the segment, then more than likely what I'm thinking of doing is I will choose a question from like Quora and answer that. So I'll let you know if it's a Quora question or a listener question. But probably going to be starting that up on episode number 25 and see how it goes. Give it 10 episodes and see how it runs. And if it turns out great, awesome, sweet, we'll run with it. If it ends up being where it's just kind of kind of throws everything out the window, then we'll try something a little bit different. So, all right. And also I've still got a few more, I've got some openings for the Conclave of Men, which is if you are wanting to make a big change in your life, if you're needing help on completing those changes in your life, the Conclave of Men is a great way of having other men in that group to help you change the mindset, help you to become the men that your son and your family and your marriage need. It helps you become better, stronger, and more self-reliant so that you can actually help the loved ones and those that are important in your family. I've been holding on the founders level for a while, but I'm thinking of going ahead and just dropping that, and I'm fixing to start raising the prices up a bit. So if you've been kind of hemming and hawing and trying to decide, do you really want to do this or not? I'm going to let you know you've got probably about another month, maybe a month and a half left before I go ahead and I go close the opportunity to get the founders special, which is just, you're going to be paying the very incredibly low fee of $75. Once you get it, you're in there, you're there, and you get to go and partake in all the glories of the Conclave of Men. After that, there's going to be a monthly fee, and it's going to be a lot higher than $75. All right. So guys, I appreciate you very much for listening. Thank you again. And if you have any questions, please submit them over to Brian with a Y at relaxedmale.com, and we will see you next week. All right. Till then, bye.